Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining this webinar, Effectively Communicating During a Crisis or Emergency. My name is Erica Cruzel, and I'm a manager with the Clinton Global Initiative team. For those who are new to CGI, we do not fund or implement projects ourselves, but we convene leaders to drive action through our commitment to action model, which are new, specific, and measurable plans that address global challenges. With the intensification of extreme climate events and the ongoing pandemic, organizations are working in a really challenging environment with limited resources. According to a survey of disaster response organizations conducted by the Clinton Foundation and Airlink, nearly half of organizations surveyed foresee a decline in corporate funding for their organization or a decline in funding from individual donors as a direct result of COVID-19, an example of the tremendous toll the pandemic is taking on organizations. Now more than ever, CGI understands the importance of supporting and strengthening nonprofits and small businesses in the Caribbean by leveraging members of the CGI Action Network community to support one another, not just on programmatic activities, but by sharing best practices and ideas. This is why CGI is very excited for today's webinar, which launches our capacity building offering, which includes online resources, a webinar series, and curated conversations. CGI cannot meet in person, but is committed to offering organizations these virtual webinar opportunities to engage in topic areas that help support organizational capacity, whether you're looking to build your organization's skills or use this platform to support this work. We will continuously work with our network to drive the development of these skill building topic areas, and soon our first set of online resources will be available. Today, we hope this webinar provides a variety of perspectives and best practices for communicating during a crisis, emergency, or natural disaster. CGI will also look to the network to find intersectional opportunities to support and elevate capacity building programs through our commitment to action model. If you would like to connect with us on any future capacity building topics or capacity building efforts, I'd love to connect or broker any introductions to further this work. My email will be available at the end of the presentation, which we will also send out after this webinar. So before I hand it over to our presenters, I just wanted to share a few housekeeping items for everyone. Please feel free to introduce yourself through the chat function, and we will also have a Q&A with all of our speakers at the end of this webinar. So if you have any questions, please submit them using that Q&A function, and we will get to as many as possible at the end of this call. And now, I will turn it over to Francesca Ernst, Director of Marketing and Digital Strategy at the Clinton Foundation, and Walter Williams, Senior Communications Manager of Global Programs at the Clinton Foundation, who will present on tips and best practices for communicating during a crisis, emergency, or natural disaster. So Francesca and Walt, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you so much, Erica. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to speak with you today and learn or share some of the things that we've learned through the Clinton Foundation and our work about effectively communicating during a crisis and emergency, such as the one we're in right now with the COVID-19 pandemic. To get us started, I'm Francesca Ernst. As Erica said, I'm the Director of Marketing and Digital Strategy for the Clinton Foundation, which essentially means I help tell our story to wider audiences and lift up our partners as much as we possibly can, working together with our program teams and across the organization. Walt, do you want to introduce yourself really quickly?
Hi, thanks, Francesca. And just to echo, it's a pleasure to be here virtually with everyone today. My name is Walt Williams. I am the Senior Global Communications Manager at the Clinton Foundation. And prior to my work at the Clinton Foundation, I actually worked in the UN at the World Food Program and at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, specifically in the emergency programming team. So my part of the presentation hopefully will be relevant to you as it comes across from some of my experience in managing emergency communications from the ground.
Yeah, and that Walt's previous experience is such a vital reason why we wanted him here today to share his experience and his best practices and advice. So let's go to the next slide. All right, so today, just to walk you through what to expect, we're going to talk about some of the best practices in communications and how that can impact what you do as an organization during a crisis or an emergency. We'll first start with the basics of good communications and planning. And then we'll also highlight some of the key platforms and tools to lay a good foundation. From there, we'll pivot to talking more specifically about how to communicate and get your message across during an emergency, and share some examples from our partners and a little bit about what we're doing at the Clinton Foundation to get the word out. Next slide. I just wanted to say, you know, obviously these are things that we're sharing from our own experience, but I definitely recommend for everybody to check out and bookmark this incredible resource from the CDC. It's all things related to communications in a crisis and an emergency, and how to manage risk and reach your audience with reliable information that they can trust, which is absolutely essential. So highly recommend you bookmark this after our presentation today, and just have that available to you as a resource, because you never know whether it's a pandemic or a natural disaster or really anything. This has a lot of tools that are really applicable to everybody. So highly recommend you check this out when we conclude here today. Next slide. Okay, so I wanted to start with just a brief question for everyone. It's a softball question, as they say. And I'd love if you can put any of your initial ideas or thoughts into the chat box, but who do you think are the best communicators, or who do you think is who do you admire as a communicator, and why? I see some good comments about good listeners, community, teachers. Michelle Obama, she displays a high level of authenticity. President Clinton, my personal favorite. If anyone has anything else, please feel free to drop it into the chat box. Artists. So Dr. Fauci, I completely agree. I think he's an incredibly effective communicator. Okay, we'll keep going. I mentioned that President Clinton is my favorite communicator, and a key reason for that is he's a remarkable listener. He connects with people, and people feel like they've connected with him. He speaks incredibly plainly. He explains things in a very simple, matter-of-fact way, and he always inspires us to do something. He always inspires us to act. So let's go to the next slide. I bring up this question, and I come back to this point in all of my presentations, because at the end of the day, good communications, whether it's ongoing communications, but especially in a crisis, come back to these fundamentals. In interpersonal communications, how we relate to one another, how I talk to you and you talk to me, and I listen and you hear, and all those different dynamics. So let's go to the next one. Obviously, it's so important to listen, whether it's one-on-one conversations, or as an organization communicating with your target audience, or you speaking internally with your coworkers and staff. Listening, asking questions, learning about the concerns and needs of your community, learning how to best communicate with them. That's an essential groundwork that will inform the rest of what you do, say, and behave. Showing empathy, addressing what people are feeling. This is vital in any communications, having that kind of emotional intelligence, but it pays real dividends in an emergency, where you have to recognize that people are human, and they don't just see things as black and white. There is an array of complexity to everything, and nuance. So that's an effective way to build trust and a rapport and respect among your community. Being a partner, showing that you're not just in it for yourself, but you are willing and able and want to lift up others, whether they're comparable or competitive organizations, or they're similar organizations that have a similar mission to you, or serve the same audiences as you. That can always be a vital thing to do. Let's go to the next. I mentioned earlier, President Clinton he speaks plainly, and he explains things with facts. And that is, especially in a crisis, but anytime really, is really essential to good communications. Being accurate is your reputation. It's everything. So fact checking, double checking, triple checking, quadruple checking the information you put out there can really mean the difference between how your audience engages with you. Be consistent and responsive. Recognize that communications is all about a relationship. So if you initiate some form of communications, keep on it. Make sure that that is being cultivated over time. And then promote action. Like I said, President Clinton inspires me because he's always encouraging us to act. For those of you who have been paying attention to the memorials and tributes to John Lewis, I think Gayle King described him as someone who never made you feel guilty, but always made you feel responsible. And I think that's such an important way for us as communicators to think about how we get our audiences to engage with us and to act for the common good. So with that, we'll move along. All right. So in a crisis, I should say there's no perfect time, and there's no perfect communications plan or perfect crisis communications plan that will solve for all the things. But if you want to be prepared for a crisis and communicating with your target audiences in a crisis, you have to start now, in this pre-crisis phase. And simple steps that you can take now can put you at an advantage when an emergency or a crisis hits. Let's go to the next slide. The first thing you should do is develop a plan, not necessarily a crisis communications plan, but just a communications plan. This is about developing and cultivating a meaningful connection with your target audience before a disaster strikes. So there's trust, so there's rapport, so there's a relationship. And that is absolutely essential to any organization, small business, or person once things get bad. So highly recommend that you start here. You create a plan with the end in mind, and you write it down. A good communications plan will keep you focused on what's important and what you can achieve. And the most important thing is that you write it down. Let's go ahead. So how do you create a communications plan? I know this is going to feel very 101, but these basics in communications are absolutely essential and will lay the foundation for you when a crisis hits. So first, have some research. Identify some trends. What are other organizations doing or communicating? What do you know about your target audience? What is happening out there in the world, and how are you responding to that programmatically? Understand that there's a lot of information out there that you don't know that you can start digging into. Second, establish a goal. What is the purpose of why you're communicating, and how will you do it? Third, and this is, if you've ever been in talks with a communications team, often the first question is, well, what is your goal? And the second question is, who is your audience? Who are you trying to reach? Why? And where can they be found? Another key component is what's the news? What's your message? And are you appealing to their head, heart, and feet? And what this means is, are you informing them, essentially their head? Are you speaking to them? Can they feel you? And do they see that you understand them? So appealing to their heart and feet. Are you motivating them to act? I always think about the head, heart, feet analogy as a really essential way to think about your messaging. What tactics and tools are you putting in place in order to reach your goals? And that essentially means, how are you reaching people? And then how will you know once you're successful? There's a saying I like that Secretary Clinton often says. I know Mayor Bloomberg often says this as well, but what gets measured gets managed and gets done. And so always keeping that idea of a return, of an end product in mind helps you prevent yourself from getting lost along the way, because there are a lot of different things you can do in a communications plan, and it's easy to get lost, but this helps you stay focused. All right, so let's dive in a little bit more into tactics and tools, because I always think that's really the meat of this, and that's what you experience when you're communicated to on any given day. And so these are essentially approaches to communications and content that are owned, meaning you put those out there. They're shared, meaning you put ideas out there, but there's a response, a give and take with the community. They're earned, meaning you earn recognition, a reputation, earned media, things along those lines, or you pay for them, which is essentially traditional advertising. And I always liken this to, like with any good financial portfolio, you want to be diversified. So it's helpful to think across these 4 areas to essentially reach your audience in different ways and set up backups. So if one system goes down or one system doesn't work in a given day or in a given situation, you have fallbacks that can help support you and keep your communication steady and flowing. So just to walk through quickly, and I know we have limited time here, and we're going to be sending this presentation around after the fact, but own tactics include your website. For those of you who may not have a website, Wix, Squarespace, GoDaddy are all free tools that can help walk you through and develop a very simple website that resonates and is easy for your users, your audiences to follow along. Email marketing. We use MailChimp at the Clinton Foundation, and it's a very simple, easy email marketing tool that can help you set up a full program to communicate with your target audiences. They also have discounts for nonprofits. Reports and writings. If there's an issue area that you are an expert in, issue a report. Tell the world about it. Share what you've learned. That's an incredibly effective own tactic that organizations can take on. Something that's vital to our work at the Clinton Foundation, you can establish partnerships. You can lead events like the one we're doing here, a virtual convening of people in the field. And another own tactic is making sure that everyone internally within your organization is equipped with the information they need to be the best possible brand ambassador on their own channels, their own social media, their communities, their networks, so on and so forth. So those are some examples of own tactics. Social media, I think this is pretty straightforward. Everybody has some understanding of social media, whether it's from personal or just, communal use. Facebook can be an incredibly powerful tool. We know most of the world is on it. It is highly focused on the visuals and video. Facebook can be a very tricky place to try to gain new audiences because a lot of it is pay to play. So we suggest always going, thinking about a Facebook group, which then essentially optimizes your audience. It engages your audience in a different way, and Facebook puts a lot of resources in it to make sure it's as engaging and compelling for people as possible. Instagram, as many of you know, that's where people find and share photos and get inspired. Visuals, again, continue to be key. Twitter is where people find opinions, latest news, breaking news, and they follow trends. It's really a place to spur activism if that's a key component of what you are doing. LinkedIn is where professionals connect. So if you have business news or industry trends to share, it's a great thing to do through LinkedIn. This is an often forgotten one, but digital listings, especially for local organizations, can people find you? And a lot of people, in fact, I think most people look to the Yelps, Googles, TripAdvisors for that type of information, and just physically being able to find you can be a huge barrier. Find you online can be a huge barrier to gaining traction for your for your organization. And then there are other considerations. You know, there's a new social media platform each week. So we certainly don't recommend diving into each of them, but if your audience is super young and there's like some sort of dance component to your work, TikTok might be the right solution for you. Or if you have a lot of recipes or gardening trends or whatever, Pinterest might be the solution for you. So, you know, there's a lot you need to weigh and consider, but knowing, again, where your audience is essential. Earn tactics include word of mouth. Do people just speak well of you, and how does that travel? Media relations, who's covering this crisis, who's covering your issue area and work? Do you have a relationship with a local reporter or the person who's covering that from a blog you read to tell them about your work and establish some form of ongoing steady communications? The best time to reach out to a reporter is not when you have a clear ask for them. It's when you just want to say, hey, here's who I am, here's what we're doing, and I just want you to know about it. And when we have news, we'll come and share it with you. But establishing a relationship is everything to a reporter. And then influencers and testimonials. There's a lot to be said about influencer marketing nowadays, but having people out there with big followings who can share the good word about your work can really make a difference. People trust their friends and family most, and so those types of trusted messengers can really carry your message. And you know, I have a saying here at the bottom that really informs what we do, but when you say something, people hear it. When someone else says it, they listen. So earned media can be an incredibly effective tool to bolster your reputation and earn trust. And then finally, there are paid tactics. This is essentially advertising. You absolutely do not need to have paid advertising to be successful in your communications, but it is a lever that you can pull if you think it would be helpful. So traditional advertising, such as putting ads in your local paper or on your local radio station, those are still incredibly effective. And then there's search engine advertising and social media advertising. And if you choose to do that, I would just highly recommend that you engage someone who does that for their livelihoods, because it is much more complex than it appears on the surface. So in summary, this is a lot. And I want people here to understand the scope and the range of variables that you can look to when you're developing a communications plan and laying the foundation of communications with your audience. So how do you manage all of it? Let's go to the next slide. The first thing, and kind of rule number one, is form a team. You don't have to go this alone. And in fact, you will be better set up both in regular day-to-day operations before a crisis, and then especially when a crisis hits, if you engage key stakeholders from day one. And so that includes, for example, and this isn't an exhaustive list, but that includes your president, maybe an executive director, general counsel, development officers, program leads. Bring all brains into the fold so you can walk through all of those communication strategies and choose collectively what makes the most sense. That will be essential in laying a foundation and a team you can go to when a crisis emerges. And then I want to provide this as very practical tips. We keep a calendar, and it literally looks like this. It is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Okay, maybe we include the date. But we keep tabs on what are we posting on our website. Are we changing or making any updates to our website today? What's going out on social media? You'll notice here, you don't have to post on every platform every day. You just need to have a plan for how you're going to sustain communication, because like I said before, it's disrespectful to the audience, to your audience, to just drop off. Really important to stay focused on mission and impact. We at the Clinton Foundation are constantly focused on how the work continues and driving that for our audiences. And then respond to real-time change. What you've just laid through this communications plan is a foundation. But that's supposed to be fluid, and that is supposed to be a place where you can start from so that nobody feels more panicked when an emergency hits. So things are fluid. So with that, I think oh, one more thing. For those of you looking for helpful tools, if you're interested in surveying your audience, SurveyMonkey is an incredibly helpful way and free way to get to know your target audiences and what's on their minds, how best to communicate with them, what they read, all of those things. Free graphics and design, I highly recommend Canva. It's so easy. I know how to use it, which is saying a lot, but they have all different types of design templates. Email marketing, I mentioned MailChimp before. Presentations, highly recommend Slides to Go. They have some nice designs that you can just lift and save for yourself. Blogging, Medium is an incredibly effective platform. And on social media, we highly recommend Hootsuite as a low cost and sometimes free option for scheduling social media posts throughout the week. But I would just note on social media, always make sure you know what's going out, because if the crisis or emergency hits, you want to pause your social media as soon as possible to be sensitive to the situation. So with that, I think I hand it over to Walt.
Great. Thanks so much, Francesca. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to go through preparing for and how to communicate through an emergency, both in the prep work for it and in the middle of it. So if you can go to the next slide. This is something that I took from a toolkit that we developed at the World Food Program. It was called our Emergency Response Framework, and it was really developed for program officers who were actually implementing programs delivering food on the ground in the middle of a war zone or a flood or the aftermath of an earthquake. But what I think is really cool about it is that it's a tool that can be applied as well to a communications function. And so I just want to walk through quickly and kind of give you some ideas on how you might understand, the various pieces that are here. And then, don't look at this as something that's prescriptive, but look at it as something that take this presentation home after, listen to what I've said, see what makes sense for you, and just kind of play around with it to see how it works best. So if you start with the right objective, the objective in communications here could be two things. It could be getting out vital information to communities that have been affected by a disaster, or it could be getting out the kind of information to donors who you need to support your response to keep, the assistance reaching the affected population. The next we talk about is the right assistance. And I think that in case of communications, we can talk about the right assistance as being that message that Francesca was talking about early. A message in itself is a form of assistance because information is power. So if you're talking to a community that's been hit by an earthquake, their power is out, but you can find the right channel to still get info to them saying, hey, help's coming, we're on the way. That is power for that community. So that in itself is a form of assistance. Next piece is, again, this concept of the right people. And so is your main priority wanting to communicate with the affected population, letting them know what type of services you can deliver to them? Like I said earlier, do you want to be communicating with donors about what your needs are? You want to be communicating with people, an influencer, someone who can advocate on your behalf. You need to define these things and then have the ability to tailor your message to each one of those audiences. The next star we talk about is the right time. And in an emergency, the right time is real time. So don't wait. You need to get the information out as you get it in. Delays in a communication side have the potential to cause operational delays. And we know that in an emergency, it's critical to reach people with assistance as soon as possible. Next is the right way. And this goes back and ties in with that whole timing concept too. Even if you get information in and maybe you get an incomplete set of data, don't be afraid to take a stake and share what you know when you know it. Um, because knowing that you're able to get information out in real time is important. It adds validity to who you are. But I think what I want to add to that too, and this goes a bit down into this concept of the balances and the bumps, this third bullet point is, if you do put information out and new information comes in later that's either updating or maybe contradicts something you said, don't be afraid to make a mistake, as long as you own the mistake. And as long as you're willing to go out and say, hey, we actually either misread this or we didn't have enough information to make this clear, but here's where we're at now and here's the situation on the ground. You will really add to your validity as an organization if you're willing to take ownership. If you can go to the next slide. Just quickly, because I know we're also a little pressed for time, these are some key steps. So assessing your needs, getting real information from your folks that you have on the ground who see what's going on in the crisis zone, following the advice of experts. The coronavirus pandemic right now is a great example. Take the messaging from the CDC, use that, share that with your communities, put that into your messaging. Amplifying credible experts, amplifying their guidance. Again, if you can have your social media profiles that are retweeting, quote tweeting, kind of as we say, piggybacking on other expert organizations, that only helps to build a critical mass of experts who are sharing the right kind of information. Be timely, be consistent, and find ways to partner, find ways to innovate. Let me go ahead and stop there and hand it back over to Erica. And thanks so much for taking the time to listen to us today.
Thank you so much, Francesca and Walt. So happy you guys were able to join us and really share a lot of great information. And so I'm really glad that we'll be sharing this presentation to all of our attendees after the webinar, so you guys can revert back and check out the tools and best practices that Walt and Francesca spoke about. So thank you both. Walt and Francesca will also be available for our Q&A portion, so feel free to continue sending in questions for them that we'll talk about and for our upcoming panelists. So now I'd like to introduce our panelists who will share their experiences around how they've adapted and learned to effectively communicate during different crises, disasters, and emergencies. First, I'd like to introduce Dervin Malcolm, a communication specialist from Jamaica, Fernando Lloveras, president of Para la Naturaleza, and Natasha Mevskorf, a program and operations associate at Atma Connect. So thank you all so much for joining and being a part of this panel. And we'll just really jump right into the first question. And this question is really for all of you, but I'll tag Dervin to start us off. And it's really just tell us a little bit about how you utilize communication strategies in your work.
Thank you very much, Erica. Thanks everybody. I feel privileged to be in your company. The general principle that we operate on, and I say we as an extension of not necessarily me, but being a part of a team at a well-established media organization, radio station, Power 106 FM. And the key thing is to seek first, which is what we treasure, seek first to understand, then to be understood, or seek first to understand, than to be understood. And when we do that, it means we put ourselves in positions where we're able to gather more, we're able to learn more, and therefore our response, our decision-making process will then be better informed. And so we have sessions with the experts. So long before any disaster strikes, we have working relationships with for example, the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, ODPEM. We have working relationships with the National Meteorological Service. Those are the people who give us the weather forecast, etc. So we build those relationships long before any disaster, and we nurture those relationships and we refresh those relationships over time, while at the same time maintaining a connection with our communities. Always on the ground, we do a lot of remote broadcasts, always checking in with the people. How are things? What's happening? What's not happening? What are your concerns? So again, it's seeking to understand. And when we gather that kind of data, apart from sharing it with our audience at home and abroad, we get the decision makers to respond to these concerns, and that in and of itself helps to make a connection which the people in these communities really cherish and they appreciate, because then they feel that they're being given a voice. They feel that not only are they being given a voice, but their issue is getting traction, is decisions are being made in relation to these issues, because nobody likes bad things about them or likes people highlighting that which is not working for them or with them or their organization, etc. So they're quick to take action. They're quick, if it's even to say, we're committing to doing so and so. And so that's the general approach that we take. It's not rocket science. It's widely used, which is to stay in touch with the experts. And you build trust with your audience. Those of us who present, we have to ensure that we are consistently trustworthy, because that is what people hang on to. So that if you, and we have the Jamaican diaspora, we have Jamaicans all over the world. During hurricanes,
Sorry, Dervin, I believe you went on mute.
I think we're back now.
Thank you.
Sorry. Right. So we build trust. I think trust is the most important thing. Trust. When people trust you, they will share with you. When people trust, sorry about that. But when people, and that trust is what you then build on, and you try to protect that trust jealously. You don't ever want to have a situation where people can no longer trust you. So on that basis of trust, we maintain relations and relationships with the professionals, with the experts. We do remote broadcasts from the communities to get a feel of what's happening or not happening. And so we're always in touch. So when that disaster strikes, or when anything of significance pops up, we also would end up with institutional information, meaning or historical data, because we would have been tracking, we would have been following, and so we're able to respond appropriately, reassuring people based on what happened then, what is happening now, and the information from the experts. So it does take some pulling together, but the fundamentals must never be underestimated. Trust, seeking first to understand than to be understood, and keeping the lines of communication open at all times.
Sure. Yeah, and I think those points were definitely highlighted in Francesca and Walt's presentation. So I think just, stressing those, building relationships and keeping that trust, I think are really important for communicating during a crisis. So I'll just quickly have Fernando jump in next and just tell us a little bit about how you utilize communications in your work. And Fernando, I think you're on mute.
Okay, okay, sorry. Hello, everybody. I think what we can perhaps share a bit of our communication experience during Hurricane Maria and afterwards, obviously. We have, I think the most important thing when you start planning is that you usually plan for the disasters you type of know, and the reality is that our disasters becomes disasters when they're beyond what you ever thought they were going to be. So planning for disaster is kind of tricky, because um, uh, it's usually never enough, and usually the plans you do, they're usually not right, because you don't expect a lot of things. So I think I'm not saying do not plan. By all means, we need to increase our planning capacity, but be prepared. The first thing is be prepared for things to go wrong, and for a lot of adaptations and creativity in the process. So I think the best way to explain this is to stop perhaps a few minutes on the context. I mean, of what we experienced in 2017. We're in Hurricane Ali, so we know exactly what these experiences are. But when you get something of this size and magnitude, the whole system collapses. I mean, not only electricity and water, you have no banking systems, no credit cards, no ATMs, no phones, very limited phone system. We even had satellite phones, it didn't work. There's very little gas or diesel, so you couldn't move, limited full supplies. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that when you try to communicate under the same circumstances, your plan needs to take into consideration that you are really handicapped here. By all means, we're like, we subscribe to AA. We're living one day at a time when you're in the middle of a crisis, and that really changes, and you have to be ready for operating under those scenarios, and all the energies during those initial weeks goes to basic stuff like, you know, you have to check your family, your neighbors, your employees, your board members. We lost 10 employees lost about 10 their houses. You concentrate and clean up. You concentrate a lot of damage assessments, community assessments. So really the communication strategy I'm talking about an NGO, so I'm not a communication. We're not a communication organization, so our focus was pretty much in the field. But under that kind of scenario, communication is usually not at the front stages of and I should say it should be yeah, very well included in your plans, but very often it just goes into the back burner, and you have to keep going back and making sure people know what's going on and what we're doing. So in terms of preparedness, you have to prepare not for a normal disaster, you have to prepare for a real disaster. There's, you know, you're never gonna be right. So I think the first thing is that to understand that. What happened really to us during that experience is our website was down. We didn't have a cloud landing page ready. We had our systems were in the process of being in the cloud. Right now, obviously, we're fully in the cloud, so that would have been safe unless there's going to be a hurricane in the cloud coming up. But we created a GoFundMe as an initial step to really go out there and start getting the funding that was offered. The MailChimp was really critical because our mailing system was down as well. Our social media, we can reach a lot of these systems anyway. So we were really crippled in the sense of even reaching out to people. And I think the interesting part here is that there was a big disconnect between what you're living in the middle of the disaster and what people outside the Puerto Rico diaspora was looking at CNN or any other news channel. They actually had much more information that we had, because we didn't have TV, we didn't have anything, so a lot of the information was going out, and the Puerto Rico diaspora was really desperate and was really really desperate to help, and we were really not ready to receive the aid or to receive the assistance. So there was a big disconnect on our capacity to communicate, our capacity to really actually receive any type of assistance, be it monetary or any other way. So I think that's another big important consideration in a communication strategy. How do you bridge this huge gap in information between the people who are inside the disaster and those who are outside the disaster?
Definitely. Thank you, Fernanda. That's such great perspective. And I might ask you a question in a couple minutes, just a little bit more about your experiences post Hurricane Maria, but I'd like to give Natasha an opportunity just to quickly tell us a little bit how you utilize communications in your work.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Erica and CGI. So ATMA has created a communication platform to strengthen resilience through neighbors helping neighbors. So we have an app called ATMA Go, and it is a hyper-local social media app which has been designed to connect community members so that they can identify problems, share solutions, and take collective action to improve the conditions in their community and become agents for change. And so our role really as an organization is to connect, support, and amplify the work that is being carried out by community members, community-based organizations, and community leaders in Puerto Rico and Indonesia, which is where we first launched our app. And so as part of our programming, we encourage everyday people to be communicators, and to do that we teach citizen journalism and digital literacy workshops so that people can tell their own stories, share information about the initiatives that they're a part of or initiatives that they would want to see started in their community, and in that way build connection with their neighbors, build community, build resilience. And so our workshops cater to all levels of literacy because essentially what we're trying to do is bring more voices into the conversation. And so for that, we teach basic techniques on how to develop ideas. And then as part of our workshops, we also are teaching our participants how to use apps like YouTube and how to accommodate different levels of literacy.
Great. Thank you, Natasha, so much for that great overview. And we'll definitely dive in a little bit deeper on some of the work that you're doing. But I'd like to ask Dervin, in your work, how do you distill critical information from various sources? You talked about, getting information from a lot of different agencies across Jamaica. So how do you distill that critical information and then translate it in terms that really resonates with your audience?
Thank you, Erica. No, that is critical because we're bombarded with a lot of information. And the question is, how do you determine the kind of information, the rate at which you get that information out there so people don't suffer from information overload? And the key thing is to try at the outset to be as straightforward and to the point as possible, so people know what the situation is, what is happening right now. So for example, I remember that earthquake that rocked Haiti. We felt, I was on air at the time, and we had always been promoting January, the month of January, as Earthquake Awareness Month in Jamaica. And that in and of itself meant the awareness was heightened already in the month of January. So when we felt the movement while we were in studio, live on radio, we were able to say to our listeners, wherever you are, remember the drill, drop, cover, hold, because that has been part of the public awareness. campaign that normally happens, and it's heightened in the month of January. And people started to call us and to express themselves as to what was happening. And then what we did was to use the opportunity to remind those who already knew, and to find out from those. So what did you do? What did you do when you felt the earthquake? That kind of interaction, that kind of engagement. And would you believe it? It happened again earlier this year. There was another one earlier this year, and as much as I was on air again, and I said, listeners, I'm not sure if you're feeling what we're feeling, but it seems as if there's an earthquake. So if you don't hear me in the next couple of minutes, it means I'm under the table in the studios. And you should do the same if you have a table nearby. Drop, cover, hold, right? That kind of thing. And so again, we would engage persons to say, okay, what did you really do? Did you really think it was an earthquake, et cetera, et cetera? So that kind of experiential engagement goes a far way in getting into people's minds that the key thing, I know it's easy to tell people, don't panic. I mean, they say it's the best way to get people to panic. Tell them don't panic. But once you have that kind of experience with them, then you are likely to have less anxiety, I think. I humbly submit. So there's that. And we also had the instance of hurricanes that we've experienced. Sorry, I'm getting a couple of calls because I'm close to showtime, but it's okay. We have time, right? But the point is, you have to be able to respond, not just over time, but in the spur of the moment. And in that time, when you have a captive audience, how do you transmit a level of calm and a sense of...
Dervin, I think we lost you again. Yeah, Dervin, I think you're still on mute.
Yes, sorry about that. Yeah, but that's the key thing. And I'm sorry, I just went back in my memory bank, and it's bringing back memories now. But I'm not sure now if I'm answering your question, because I went into the moment just now.
No worries. I think you said a really critical piece about, sharing community perspectives, which I think Natasha and Fernando can both attest to as being really important to the conversation of during a crisis. A trusted resource of organizations, but also, hearing from other community members, I think on what's going on, I think is really valuable. And I'll definitely have Natasha and Fernando talk a little bit about that. But Dervin, I know you're at showtime, so I just want to thank you so much for joining us, Dervin, for joining. And I know you have to run to your radio show, but I know you've graciously offered your email address for anyone who would like to be in contact with you. And so folks can reach out to me for his contact if you'd like to get in touch. So thank you, Dervin, so much.
Thank you too, and my sincerest apologies. I really just got started, but I really hope, I look forward to an opportunity to share once again, anytime. I'm ready when you're ready.
We look forward to it, Dervin. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, I'm gonna hop over to Fernando. I know you talked a lot about the various challenges that Para la Naturaleza had post Hurricane Maria, with the internet being down and the power and not really having effective methods of communication. But I just wanted for you to dive a little bit deeper maybe on how your organization did continue to engage with supporters And what is the organization now doing to apply those lessons learned in the work that you're doing today?
Okay, well, we had the great advantage that we had our development director was in New York, so we had somebody outside of Puerto Rico, and we were able to require we are a nature conservation organization. I should have started with that. So we do manage nature reserves throughout the island. We do historic preservation work. We maintain 6 historic national register sites. We do a lot of environmental and historic education with our staff year-round. And we have right now a huge reforestation project and an agroecological project as well. So it's a quite diverse organization, but we were lucky that we could have basic, physical communication every week. The superintendents of each region came to the main office and report what happened during that week. And based on that, we put the development and communication team put together a weekly email to our donors and supporters. So that kept us going. It was very much appreciated by everybody that we kept them informed on a weekly basis. It was very supportive, and we got a lot of private support based on those those very basic communications, and it helped a lot. Sometimes you don't have to. We didn't have a lot of tools, but just a simple tool really worked and made a big difference.
That's great. Yeah, I think organizations, hopefully that are listening, can take that away and really think about, sometimes communications, as Francesca mentioned, doesn't necessarily mean all outlets or all methods. So I think it's good to hear that you can be effective with just, some basic communication. So that's fantastic. So Natasha, you talked a lot about, you talked about the work that you're doing at Atma Connect with the Atma Go app. And so I'd love to know, during a disaster or crisis, we often turn to news, data, and research as a reliable source of information to educate and inform our communities. But I'd love for you to tell us the impact of storytelling and how that's an important part of communications in the work that you're doing.
Okay, sure. So I think storytelling is important because it's what makes data compelling. As organizations, we don't, nonprofit organizations that we do fundraising, we don't email data and statistics to our donors. We share impact stories so that issues are relatable and accessible. And so the same goes for driving public dialogue, creating behavior change, and activating your neighbors and your community to get involved. So, for example, when this pandemic started, we have this amazing community leader in Naguabo. Her name's Marini Vasquez. Maybe a lot of you who work in Puerto Rico know her. She started this series on Atma Go called Héroes con Mascarillas, Heroes with Masks. And in her post, she's highlighting everyday community members doing small gestures of mutual support in their community, whether that is the person who creates a hand washing station for the male person, or someone who's doing grocery runs for elderly and vulnerable people in the community, or someone who has access to a printer in a community center, printing out the lesson plans for children who don't have access to internet or a computer at their homes. It's posts like that that can really inspire people to get involved. You don't have to do a big gesture. It's the small gestures that count, and also create behavior change. So in the case of the crisis, really emphasizing in these posts the importance of wearing a face mask and practicing basic hygiene, right? And normalizing the behavior so that, we protect the most vulnerable. And then that's the usefulness of stories, right? And so in the case of a disaster and crisis, first person accounts give you the context of who and how people are being affected. You know, numbers and news can only go so far. It's the stories of people living in the disaster that are really going to drive how you design and how you implement a response. And then also thinking about, so I personally wasn't in Puerto Rico for Hurricane Maria, and understand that there wasn't connectivity. You know, you couldn't even get signal to make a phone call. But I think the usefulness of an app like Atma Go is after, once connectivity is restored, is the community being able to document themselves, you know, what has been done and what is still needed, so that, you know, players like NGOs, government agencies can funnel the funding and resources to be able to rebuild. And then finally, storytelling is also about, you know, being able to tell your truth and not allowing the media to sum up your life in one statistic. You know, storytelling is about making the change you want to see and ultimately being part of the solution. Thank you.
That's great, Natasha. Yeah, and I like, you know, the last piece that you said about the media. And I know, Fernando, you had talked about how the media portrays a disaster sort of in one way that's a little bit different perhaps than what's really going on in the ground. So I think that, you know, the Atma Go app, you know, allowing people to really share their experiences, I think is a great way for communities to be able to connect, you know, post even during a disaster.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot, because one of the things that you have to capture is what you live in the moment. And we ask our team to do a bitácora, like a notebook, and write their stories and write what they experience. But this app seems to be a great way of recording that and sharing that. Definitely, I would look into that.
Yeah, and Natasha did share that in the chat if anyone is interested, her website as
Great.
well. And we'll do the same for Fernando as well. So I want to thank you both. I am finished with my questions, and I would love to move over to our Q&A portion from our audience and our attendees. So continue to submit questions, but in the meantime, we're going to bring in Walter and Francesca as well. So welcome back, everyone. And it looks like we do have a first question for Walter and Francesca, which is, what are your thoughts on strategies for models of strong communication that can engage multiple brands as well as a central effort or campaign?
Walt, I'll kick it off and please add any additional thoughts, but I absolutely think that's a vital strategy that we try to deploy all the time at the Clinton Foundation. You know, there's a common phrase, or it's a proverb of some sort. If you want to go fast, you go alone, and if you want to go far, you go together. And it's true in communications as well. And so, you know, I can give an example. Recently, we teamed up with a media outlet called Motherly. Our Too Small to Fail initiative teamed up with an outlet called Motherly and an outlet called Bustle to really study how are people affected during this crisis. And so if we had just done that alone, that would have been significant. But by teaming up with them, we were able to leverage the resources and reach of their audiences of millions of people. And so partnering with others, both in communications and specifically awareness campaigns, is vital. And it's a centerpiece of everything we do at the Clinton Foundation, whether it's partnerships like that, or we try to establish broadcast partnerships. For example, for those of you who were part of CGI years ago, we would do broadcast partnerships as part of our annual meetings. Curated conversations with CNN, with Bloomberg News, with CNBC. And all those things are just absolutely vital. And it's not just us. We also find like-minded organizations or organizations that can offer something that we don't necessarily have in-house. So we really try to leverage the collective resources of our partner community and bring those fruits to bear through partnerships and collaboration as relates to communication strategy. Walt, anything you'd add?
I think exactly what you said is right. You know, a lot of times I've used tactics where you look at issuing joint statements with heads of organizations. And I think you should look at it through both the communications lens, but also through that programmatic lens. And so, for example, we used to do a lot of joint statements with the head of WFP and the head of UNICEF and the head of UNHCR. WFP had the deepest field reach. UNICEF had the biggest media presence just by way of, you know, working with kids. People had an interest in it. And UNHCR was of most interest at the moment because it was at the height of the 2015 migration crisis in the Mediterranean. So looking strategically about how you put those voices together to get the biggest impact, you know, is a great strategy. I think the only thing that I will say in caution, and again, I'm saying that it's a great idea and absolutely push for collaboration. You should also keep in mind what's the risk to it. And so if an organization has a fallout because of some type of a scandal, whether it's, you know, the head of the organization, something happens with them, or say that there's impropriety with how money is used, just keep that in the back of your mind, because what you want to also always have available to you is a quick way to respond to what our partnership was related to X. You know, we're not commenting on, you know, the internal workings of this organization. So just with a grain of salt, I'll throw that out there.
Great, thank you, Francesca and Walter, for that. Our participants shared some questions prior to this call, and one of them was related, Francesca and Walt, to the point that you made earlier about using facts to lead during a crisis. But how can organizations cut through mis or disinformation to get through to the real facts? And, you know, I'll have Francesca and Walt maybe start, and then, you know, Fernando or Natasha, if you guys want to chime in with any additional thoughts, they're welcome.
Yeah, this is like the $16 million question, or, you know, whatever that phrase is. It's such a good question. And it's something that we have felt firsthand at the Clinton Foundation, dating back for a really long time, but heating up certainly in 2015. And it's something we still face today. You know, our strategy has always been to lead with our work and to put our programs and the people we serve out first. And this focus, and it's a relentless focus on being accurate in the information we share. We're relentless in terms of the metrics that we track in terms of impact for the foundation. But our best strategy is to keep telling our story, is not to drown in the sea of disinformation that's out there on the internet. People want to know what the Clinton Foundation is actually up to, they will come to us directly and search for that information. And our whole goal, specifically from a digital and communication standpoint, is to keep the focus on the work. So we never engage in conspiracy theories, the disinformation. We really stay above it, and we really just stay focused on the work. And that would be really my counsel to anyone, is there's almost no benefit to engaging in disinformation. Stay focused on your facts and keep that noise in the background.
Great, thank you, Francesca. And Fernando or Natasha?
Well, in our case, I mean, we're an organization that really focuses on data. It's part of our culture. So we do a lot of metrics. We measure a lot of stuff. So for us to have data is part of the culture. But I would like to stress that in these times of needs, the numbers are important and they're there. But like Natasha said, the stories are really the real data. And what we experience really with the communities, we first, obviously, being a nature conservation organization, we became a distribution center throughout the whole island for basic necessities. We use, all of our equipment and our staff to just distribute things to communities. We focus on children's and to try to explain, because of our educators, we have about 40 of our staff who are educators. We focus on children's writing communities to make them understand what this climatic event was all about, and the recovery, how nature has all this resiliency and recovery that inspire a lot to everyone. And the reforestation program, I mean, we engage in a lot of activities that really change our course and change our relationship with these communities. So the real impact, and the real story is that I think what Dervin was saying, the trust that came about of working together and recovering in a disaster was a game changer for the organization, and hopefully it was a game changer for our 33 communities that we work directly with. So it was interesting. And how do you measure that is still, there are a lot of things that cannot be measured, but obviously when you combine the stories with the data that you can actually come up with, it becomes a very strong communication tool. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Fernando.
Mm-hmm.
And we're at time, so I just want to give Natasha final words before we wrap up the webinar.
Oh, thank you, Erika. So I guess part of what we emphasize in our citizen journalism training is to our participants is that, they should focus on putting their narrative out there, and that, as we prepare for disaster and continue to deal with the COVID-19 crisis, to seek information from government agencies and from community-based organizations, which will have the facts that you want to share with your community.
That's great. Well, thank you all so much. To my team at the Clinton Foundation, Francesca and Walter, and to our panelists, Dervin, Natasha, and Fernando, thank you all so much for your time and for sharing your work, experiences, and perspectives. And I hope that attendees on our call today were really able to get some considerations and best practices for how to communicate during a crisis. As mentioned earlier, the CGI team will be working with the network continuously to develop these topic areas for these webinars, and are always looking ways to support commitments to action around capacity building specifically. So if you have feedback or any ideas that you'd like to share, please reach out to me or your CGI point of contact. My email is on the slide, and we will circulate the presentation and notes after the call. So thank you all so much for joining.
Thank you, Erika.
Thank you so much.